Play the Modern Defence by Andrew Martin. The object of this tape is to examine the defensive system known as the modern defence. This is introduced when black plays 1 g6 against either 1 d4, 1 c4 or 1 e4. The system differs from the perk defence in that black defers the development of his king-knight, e.g. he could play 1 d6 and 2 knight f6, but we're concerned with systems in which he fianchettos his king-bishop immediately. The object of this tape is not to give a blanket coverage of variations. Rather, the emphasis will be on games and exposition of the strategies involved. Right. The first tape will examine variations in which white erects a large pawn centre. And the first one I want to examine is the admirably system. Let's start from diagram 1. White plays 1 e4, black plays 1 g6, white plays 2 d4, and black plays 2 bishop g7, and white introduces the admirably system by playing his c-pawn to c4. Black continues with 3 d6, and white plays 4 knight to c3. Here we have the basic position as shown in diagram 1. Botvinnik was of the opinion that this particular system posed black the most problems. He felt that white's simple direct development behind a large pawn centre would ensure a clear strategical advantage for many moves to come. But are things that simple? Now, there are many things black can do in this position. He can try 4 knight c6, he can try 4 knight d7, he can play 4 e5 or 4 c6, but none of these have proved totally satisfactory. In most of the games, black was suffering from a spatial disadvantage and white held the upper hand. We will examine on this tape what I believe to be an excellent practical choice for black, giving him an active game, a game with counterplay, and above all something interesting. The system begins with 4 f7 f5. This move came into prominence at the Sous Interzonal of 1967, when Grandmaster István Bílek of Hungary tried it out against his stronger compatriot Lajos Portis. At that time, Portis was regarded as one of the best players in the world, a highly competent Grandmaster with an excellent overall grasp of opening theory. With black, what had Bílek to lose against such a player? So he tried this unusual variation. In the event, the game was a draw, and although most players considered black's idea to be rather dubious, no clear refutation was found at the time and has since been found. Now, I believe that this is an interesting idea against such a system for white, because it unbalances the game immediately. Unless white has a very good knowledge of opening theory, he won't be expecting this move. And if you arm yourself with the analysis on this tape, you will have excellent chances to surprise your opponent and to create an unbalanced game immediately. Bílek tried the idea out a few more times, but interest dwindled. Nobody really trusted this system. I've examined Bílek's games critically, and I believe that black's system is playable and does give him good chances. And although white may preserve a slight positional advantage if he plays extremely accurately, It's difficult to play very accurately when you're confronted with something completely new. So after 4 f7 f5, what should white do? Normally he'll take the pawn off with 5 e takes f5. He wants to do this rather than to leave his pawn on e4, because he's going to try and bust black on the light squares. Now, already black's confronted with a choice, but normally he recaptures with the bishop. If he played 5g takes f5, then white would play 6 queen h5 check, forcing black to move his king to f8. Now, although this might not be so bad, I think for a lot of players it would be unattractive to move the king so early in the game. It's true that black can hit back at white with knight c6 and knight to f6, slightly embarrassing the white queen. But I think that white should preserve an advantage in all variations if he just keeps his head. Perhaps the sober knight f3 in this position is best immediately, and after knight f6, simply to play queen to h4. White's probably slightly better. So if that's a bit bizarre for you, let's try recapturing on f5 with the bishop, which I believe to be the best move. So black plays 5, bishop takes f5. And now we reach a point of choice for white. Should he try to exchange bishops immediately or continue with his development? In the initial game, Portish-Bielek, white continued with 6 bishop d3, and this will be the first variation that we examine. Play 6 bishop d3 on your boards, please. Do you think that black can take the d-pawn in this position? It's clear that if he plays bishop takes d3 and white recaptures with the queen on d3, white will have achieved his objective. Black's e6 square will then become very weak, and white would simply continue with knight to f3, castles and rook to e1, after which he would have the better game without any problems whatsoever. In the game Portish-Bielek, Bielek captured on d4, bishop takes d4, and this is what I would recommend that you do. Portish continued with bishop takes f5. If he didn't, then he would have lost a pawn for no compensation. And Bielek played the forced move, bishop takes c3 check. Portish recaptured, 8b takes c3. Bielek recaptured, 8g takes f5. Now stop for 1 minute and look at this position and see if you can see what white did. I ask you to stop in this position because we've had a more or less forced sequence after the move 6 bishop d3. If somebody plays bishop d3 against you and you take on d4, you're going to have this position almost by force. And I think most people will give, like Portish did, a check on h5. Portish played 9, queen h5 check. Now obviously king f8 is pretty unattractive because of queen takes f5 check, knight to f6, bishop to h6 check. So Bielek played 9, king d7. Portish played queen takes f5 check. Bielek played 10 e6, and Portish retreated his queen to d3. Now we're still playing forced moves. If you don't like black's position, I'd ask you to think again, because if black can complete his development satisfactorily, he'll have an excellent game against the poor pawn structure of white. It's true that white's pawns are shattered, but he does retain attacking chances against the black king associated with the break c4, c5. Now Bielek played in this position 11, queen to f6, which is the position of diagram 2. We'll follow the game through to the end, and then I'll come back to this position and we'll start to suggest improvements on what Portish could have played and what Bielik could have played. Portish played 12 knight to f3. Black played 12 knight to c6. And Portish played 13 c5. He's trying to bust the king position open by taking on d6 and maybe continuing with bishop to a3, something like that. So this forced Bielik to trade queens by playing 13 queen g6. And he should really have had the worst of it if Portish had played 14 queen takes g6, h takes g6, 15 bishop f4, when the black position's a little shaky. Perhaps Bielik felt that he had to get the queens off while he could in order to nullify the white attack. But it shouldn't have worked out that way. In the event, the game continues, as I've said, 14 queen to d1, and Bielik was able to finally claw his way to equality by playing 14 queen to e4 check, 15 bishop to e3, 15 knight g e7, 16 c takes d6, c takes d6 for black, 17 queen to b3, knight to a5, 18 queen to b5 check, knight e c6, 19 castles long, 19 a6 for black, 20 queen to c5, 20 d5 for black. Portish played 21 knight g5, and black played queen c4, after which the game was agreed drawn. And I suppose that's a fair result, because black's knights are quite good pieces in this position, and I think he's finally clawed his way to equality. But Portish seemed to play the last few moves of the game almost as if he was shocked. Now, could black improve? Did he have to get the queens off? Was there not? Go back to diagram 2 and replace the black queen on d8. Let's suppose that black didn't play this move queen f6. Look at this position for a while. Black's game doesn't seem that precarious to me, as long as he could prevent white from opening up the game with the move c4, c5. I've looked at this position, and it seems to me if black can stop white from making this advance, then he has even the better of the game, because black's king may look a little bit funny on d7, but don't forget that it can be perfectly safe there as long as white doesn't play this move, c5. Therefore, I'm suggesting the move 11 knight to a6 in place of queen to f6, and I believe this to be a significant improvement for black. If white now opens up the game with 12 c5, I think that black can simply take it off with knight takes c5, 13 queen to b5 check, and black simply retreats his king to c8, winning a pawn. Let's look at some variations after 11 knight a6, and we'll see, I think, that black obtains excellent chances. The first variation I want to examine is if white plays the natural 12 bishop to e3, aiming to play c5. I suggest that black continues to consolidate his position with 12 b6. Now this incidentally prepares an exchange sacrifice, which can be seen if white tries to trap the rook on h8 by playing 13 bishop d4. And now I'm suggesting that black sacrifices with knight to e7 on move 13, 14 bishop takes h8, queen takes h8, and now to avoid black's knights crawling all over white's position, white tries to get castled as quickly as possible. He plays 15 knight f3, black plays 15 knight c5, white, being the exchange up, tries to trade pieces by playing queen to d4 on move 16, black plays queen g8, white castles, and black plays 17 knight to f5 with what I consider to be very good compensation for the exchange. With best player, of course, I think the position's no more than equal. For instance, we can reach a natural balance in this position if white plays simply 18 queen f4, black plays knight to d3, white plays 19 queen to e4, and black plays his knight back to c5. But don't forget to draw with black against a player who is your equal or slightly stronger than you, or even much stronger than you. It's not a bad result, and I think black will be happy with a draw in this position. I think the reason that the position's equal, black has compensation of course, but it's probably not winning compensation, is that white's rooks lack scope. There's no immediate entry point, nor is there any potential entry point. White has to build up on the e6 square in order to get in, and black will always have chances against the pawns on c4 and c5, c4 and c3, excuse me. White can't leave open the position with a4, a5, because after a4, black simply plays a5 himself. In general, in this position, black will concentrate his forces on the king side, perhaps with queen g7 at some stage, rook to f8. He might play his king back to c8, but those knights are protecting black's central pawns very securely, and any attempt by white to trade one of the knights off will leave his king position rather exposed, or leave the pawns on c4 and c3 exposed. I think the natural balance has been reached and black has equalised. So we'll go back. Let's set the position up after white has played 12 bishop to e3 and black has replied with 12 b6. I'm suggesting that white's best move is not to go for the tricky bishop to e4, but to continue development with 13 knight to f3. He's just going to castle. But now we see that black's position is more secure than the other variation that Bielek played. And although white keeps some sort of attack, I believe that black can survive. For example, if white plays the immediate 14 knight to e5 check, black simply plays his king back to e8, and then the white knight has to retreat. He shouldn't play his king to c8, after which the move 15 c5 is very strong, with the idea of a subsequent knight f7. But if he plays his king to e8, then knight f7 will have been prevented, the knight has to retreat, and black can play his knight to f5, and only then the queen to f6. In this particular variation, you can see how the knight on a6 and the pawn on b6 has slowed down the white attack, and that white doesn't have this queen takes g6 exchanging possibility that he had in the Portish game. Back at diagram 2 then, And we'll consider another variation. Instead of queen f6, black plays knight a6, and now another 12th move for white is aiming for c5 by a different route by playing 12 bishop to a3. Now in the previous variation, black was more or less forced to play b6 holding up c5, which as we've seen is the source of his main problems. But this bishop a3 move I don't believe to be very good, because it allows black to develop his queen more aggressively, and he can play his queen to g5. What should white do in this position? He can't allow black to take his g-pawn. If he plays g3, black can go on developing with knight to f6, and then play his queen across to a5 with an excellent game. So I suggest that white tempts black to take the g-pawn by playing 14 knight to f3. Now obviously taking the g-pawn is very dangerous, because white plays 15 rook to g1, and with a subsequent check on g7, this looks like curtains for black. But of course after 14 knight to f3, black can simply play his queen to a5, forcing a retreat of the bishop, and then he gains a valuable tempo. He can play on the next move knight to e7. Again, we play his knight to c5 later on, and his position's a lot more secure. I don't think bishop a3 is a good move. It puts the bishop offside too early. If you don't want to play queen g5, you've got a satisfactory alternative in queen f6 anyway, because c5 is not very dangerous. Black can give a check on e5 and pick the c-pawn up on the next move. Back again to diagram 2. Play the move 11 knight to a6 again. And another suggested 12th move for white is knight to f3. I suggest that black replies with queen to f6. And now what can white do? Look at the usefulness in all the variations of this knight on a6. If white now plays 14 bishop g5, black plays 14 knight to c5, which I consider to deserve an exclamation mark. One of the points of the whole idea is that if white now captures on f6, black has time to take on d3 with check. And suppose that white now plays, after the check, king to d2, black captures on f6 and retains the better game. Because therefore after knight c5, I'm suggesting that white doesn't allow black to capture on d3 but plays 15 queen to d4, and I think that black should simply change the queens in this position. Queen takes d4, white reorientates his pawn structure by 16, c takes d4, black drops his knight in on e4, white plays 17 bishop e3, and black attains an equal game by playing 17 knight to e7. Now just stop and look at this position for a while. White's attack with the exchange of queens has disappeared, and black has a few open files for his rooks, notably the g file and the f file, and he can hope to create some counterplay on the king side later on. Meanwhile, it won't be easy for white to prise open the centre and to create some play himself on the b file, and I think black can look forward to a comfortable game from this position. In all of these lines, black was trying to prove that his structure was essentially a sound one, and that white had little or no compensation for his doubled c-pawns other than to play for equality. I suggest that if you play knight a6, you check through this analysis several times and try to come up with some ideas of your own. You'll see that in most variations, black can consolidate his position, which tends to suggest that his position is sound in the first place if he doesn't go queen f6 and try to exchange the queens. It's obviously dangerous, this move, because it allows white to develop an attack with the queens on the board. But it seems like a significant improvement if all this analysis stands up. You can confirm this by playing it yourself. All the way back to diagram 1 now, and we'll play the moves 4 f5, 5 e takes f5, 5 bishop takes f5, and instead of bishop d3 we'll now examine white's second possibility, which I incidentally consider to be more dangerous, the positional move 6 knight to f3. Now, at first sight, this may not seem devastating, but essentially white is challenging black to a positional battle. He's trying to prove that his structure is more secure, that he has an easier plan of development, and in general I think this move gives black the most problems. We'll follow another of Bilec's games, this time against Lev Polugaevsky of the USSR. Bilek played 6 knight to h6. Does this seem odd to you? Well, when black played f5, he weakened his e6 square, and the last thing he wants is for a white knight to settle there, possibly on a route via the g5 square. 6 knight to h6 not only keeps the f-file uncluttered if black castles, but also prepares to counter knight to g5 with knight h6 to f7. Black's going to rely on the activity of his pieces to balance the position dynamically and to compensate for his weaknesses along the e-file with active play. Polugaevsky-Bilek continued 7 bishop to e2. 7h3 has also been played, after which a game Langevig-Bilek, Lugano 1968, continued 7 castles, 8 bishop e3, knight to a6, 9 queen to d2, knight to f7, 10 bishop to e2, and black staked out in the centre by playing 10 c5. The game was unclear, but I don't think that black's chances are any worse in this position. Let's go back to Polugaevsky-Bilek, in which Polugaevsky has played bishop e2, and black continues developing with castles. White castles, and black plays the characteristic development knight to a6. Now already black's got all his pieces developed. He's ahead of white in development, but this won't count for much unless he can create active play immediately and compensate for his weaknesses on the e-file by playing against white's centre. One thing you ought to notice is that Bilek is trying this system out against the world's strongest players. It's always the best test to try it out against these guys. If you get crushed, then you can give it up. But there might be a nagging doubt if you tried it against a weaker player that there might be an improvement somewhere. If you look at Polugaevsky's development in this game, it's very simple and classical. He's just putting his pieces on good squares. Normally that's the reaction of a good player to a system which he doesn't know. He'll just try and play as solidly as possible without giving too much away. But this system's not quite like that, because black becomes active very quickly and white has to take fairly dynamic measures to counter the black position. So what did this move knight a6 achieve? Well, black wants to play in the centre with c5, and he prepares after c5, d5 to drop his knight back to c7, again covering the e6 square. After knight to a6, Polugajewski continued with the immediate d5, which is slightly surprising. He is looking to exchange the white square bishops again and to try and exploit the unfortunate e6 square. Black played c7, c5, and Polugajewski headed directly for e6 by playing 10 knight to g5. Black played 10 knight to c7. Now this is very typical in this variation, the manoeuvre knight a6 to c7 if the centre's blocked with the pawns on d5, c4, d6, c5. Take a look at this position. Black's pieces are still very active, supporting natural pawn attacks on the white centre by playing a7, a6 and b7, b5 or e7, e6. I can only emphasise again that he does have weaknesses on the e-file, and obviously if white managed to exchange the white square bishops, this would accentuate the weakness. So black's going to decline an exchange of white square bishops, and after 11 bishop to d3, which Polugajewski was obviously planning, he retreated 11 bishop d7. White played 12 knight to e2. He could have played 12 rook to e1, which seems the natural move, hitting at the e7 point. But then we'll see the usefulness of the knight on h6, because I think then it would immediately drop back to f7. Now what can white do in this position? If he plays knight takes f7, rook takes f7 covers the e7 point, and black can prepare b5. If white plays his knight into e6 after knight f7, black takes off with the bishop, white recaptures d takes e6, and black plays his knight to e5 with an excellent position. So knight to f7 would appear to solve black's problems after rook to e1. You'll see the dynamic balance existing in this line, black's activity compensating for his structural weaknesses. This is the main feature of the line. So back in Polugajewski-Bielek, he continued with not the natural rook e1, but knight to e2. Black played knight back to f7 as before. Polugajewski took on f7, and black captured with the rook. Now I want you to stop your tape recorders and just look at this position for a while and try and assess the chances for both sides. This position objectively is probably a little bit better for white, but black's activity should be in practice sufficient to hold the balance. He'll nearly always get good chances, and even Grandmaster Polugajewski was unable to find a fully satisfactory continuation. We'll see the rest of the game. As I said at the beginning, the emphasis is on games and exposition of strategy rather than variations in this tape. I think you tend to learn more from examining Grandmaster games in the variation than looking at lines. So let's see the rest of the game. Polugajewski played 14a4. Black played queen to f8. 15 rook a3 was played. Bit of a strange move that. One would normally have expected 15 bishop to e3. But even then, black would continue with e7, e6, getting rid of the weakness on e7 and obtaining, I think, a generally level position. But even after 15 rook a3, black played e6. Now again, I'd like you to stop and have a look at this position and see how black has eliminated his weakness on e7. What should white do now? Well, if you considered any other move than the move Polygaevsky played, which was d takes e6, I think that you'll find that black obtained an easy game by taking on d5. So I think Polygaevsky was forced to take on e6 in this position, which he did. D takes e6, and black maintained the activity of his forces by playing bishop takes e6. Analysis of this position reveals that black has managed to keep his forces active, a thing that you should remember in this position. You must play actively at all costs after 4f5, otherwise your structural weaknesses will tell more and more as the game progresses. So let's see the rest of the game. 17 knight to c3 by white. Black played bishop to d4. Only now did Polygaevsky play bishop to e3, but then his rook on a3 is looking a bit silly. Bielek captured on e3. F takes e3. And black completed the last of his freeing pawn advances by playing d6, d5, obtaining immediate equality. White captured on d5, 20, c takes d5. Black played knight takes d5. White liquidated. Knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, 22, bishop e2. Black captured on f1 check, 23, bishop takes f1, and black played his queen to the middle of the board, queen to f5. The game went on for a few more moves and was drawn on move 32. But in this position, black is very well placed. The opening can be said to have been a success. Important points to notice are then is that when black played d6, d5, he immediately assumed the initiative because his pieces were more actively placed. You should always be on the lookout for such liberating moves as this. They'll often be crucial to a correct handling of the position. If you examine this game closely, you'll begin to see some of the ideas that black introduces when he plays the move f5. It's not possible to examine exhaustively all the possibilities for both sides anymore, but I feel that you've got a good grounding and certainly enough analysis to start playing the move in your own games. What then have we learnt about black's position after f5? Have we learnt that his idea is positionally dubious and that his king pawn remains permanently weak throughout the game? These criticisms have been levelled at the move, but even today there's no refutation, and this analysis would seem to prove that there won't be a refutation for some time to come. Before we leave the line, a final note on alternatives to e takes f5, right back at diagram 1. These examples are quite instructive in that they show what happens if white continues with stereotype moves instead of taking correct positional measures immediately. Let's say, for instance, that after 4 f5, white didn't capture on f5 and continued by playing 5 bishop to e3. I suggest that black continues with the move 5 knight to c6. He doesn't take on e4. He hardly ever wants to take on e4. It just brings the white knight to a good square. This position was reached by a slightly different move order. Black played 4 knight c6, white played 5 bishop e3, and only then black play 5 f5 in the game Martin Coates from Portsmouth 1979. I didn't like this position very much as white. It seemed to me that the move f5 was an improvement for black on the normal e5, and I continued with 6 d5. Black played his knight to e5. I played my knight to f3. Coates took on f3. I took with the queen. Black played knight to f6, and I played 9h3. I don't think white's any more than equal in this position, and it more or less represented making the best of a bad job rather than any clear plan of how to secure an advantage against knight c6. But if you're playing natural moves for white, I think it's more natural to play after knight c6, 6 queen to d2, which in fact was played in the game Nye Levy in the Scottish Championship 1968. Again, black was able to work up a good position very quickly by playing the move 6 f4. This obviously forced the capture. 7 bishop takes f4, and black captured on d4 with the knight. Now in general, whenever black gets a knighted on d4 like this, which can't be attacked by a white pawn and will stay there for the rest of the game more or less, supported by a pawn on e5 or c5, he can generally be said to have attained equality at least. And this game proved that this was so, because white castled on the queen side on move 8, and black cemented his knight in with c5. White tried to kick the knight away with knight ge2, but again black was having none of this, and he continued to cement the knight in by playing 9e5. And I played 10 bishop e3. Levy played knight to f6, threatening knight to g4. 11 f3 was played, and Levy played a6. We'll leave the position here with the assessment that black has excellent attacking chances on the queen side, and white's going to have difficulty completing his development. What else can white do on move 5? Well, he can play 5 knight to f3. There's nothing wrong with that. I suggest that black continues with knight to f6 or knight to h6. He can play bishop to e2, after which I think that black should play his knight to c6. In general, any move that doesn't bolster up d4, black should follow with knight to c6. I can't see any other really good moves for white in this position. He could play f3, but then again knight c6, d5, knight to d4, bishop to e3 by white, and black plays c7, c5 with quite a good position. So then the flanking blow f5 I think is playable in all variations. It's not very well known, it's not got much analysis on it, which is of course a benefit. So study the games in this section closely, and I think you'll have the all-purpose answer to the Averbach system. Well, this is the end of side 1 now. Please fast forward and go on to side 2. Side 2. The next line to examine is one of White's most aggressive attempts against the modern defence. It has similarities to the Austrian attack against the Perk, and if you look at the position in diagram 3, we'll see how this is reached. White plays 1 e4, black plays 1 g6, white plays 2 d4, bishop g7, 3 knight c3, d6, 4 f4. You'll see already that White's erected a very aggressive structure. He hopes to develop his pieces as actively as possible behind this big pawn centre, and then launch this centre forward as rapidly as possible, hopefully pushing black's pieces further and further back until he runs right out of space. The question is, as black, what should we do to stop him? Now, the normal approach for many years has been simply to transpose into the Perk defence by playing knight to f6, but I don't consider this to be justified at all. In any case, it's been proved that White obtains the advantage quite easily in most variations of the Perk defence, simply by using this knight on f6 as a target and advancing e4, e5 at the appropriate moment. So we'll keep this knight at home for quite a while. When the modern was first being played, it was thought that the move c7, c6, intending queen to b6, bishop to g4, putting pressure on the white centre, was quite good for black. But subsequent measures were found for White in which he could consolidate in the centre and again advance at the right moment, castling queenside and instigating a rather dangerous attack. We don't want to be left with a cramped game, because that's not in the spirit set out in the tape. We want to play actively, interestingly, to maintain winning chances, and above all to play an unbalanced game in which we are not going to be run out of space or crushed off the board. So let's consider the move, which I consider to be black's best option at this point, 4 a7 a6. Now, how does this seem to you? And above all, what are the ideas behind it? Well, firstly, it must be pointed out that black is renouncing conventional development. He plans to expand on the queen side by playing b7, b5, and to pressurise the white centre from long distance by playing bishop to b7, knight to d7, and perhaps c7, c5, and b7, b5, b4. Now, these are ambitious ideas. They're aggressive, and they're a far cry from knight f6 and castles of the Perk. Psychologically, he puts white in an awkward position immediately, because what should white do now after a6? Should he try and punish black for this arrogant move? Should he rely on conventional development to refute black's setup? Well, these are questions that could trouble the white player, especially a white player who hasn't seen this move before. For instance, he might react with a5, a4, a2, a4, which I don't consider to be a very good move. But these questions apart, is black's scheme sound? Well, let the analysis and your games speak for themselves. The first game I'm going to look at is the stem game of this system, in which black's strategy succeeded completely. Examine this game carefully, because it highlights black's ideas perfectly and gives a good example of what can happen to white if he falters with his development. Set up the pieces in diagram 3 and let's begin. We're following the game Zaudemer Kotov from Amsterdam sometime in the 60s. I haven't got the date with me. Black played 4 a7 a6, and Zaudemer continued with conventional development by playing 5 knight to f3. I think this is a move which will occur a lot in your games, and I think you should continue with b7 b5, as Kotov did. 6 bishop e3 was played, bishop b7 by black, 7 bishop to d3 by white, and Kotov played knight to d7. Now what have both sides achieved in this position? White seems, at the face of it, to have completed the first stage of his development. But what are his pieces doing apart from protecting this centre? I suppose he's going to continue his development with queen to d2 and then castles either long or short, according to Black's subsequent play. But he's playing like a man without a plan, playing natural moves in the hope that something's going to turn up. In general, against the modern defence, this doesn't happen. Black, on the other hand, has a plan, a very clear plan. He's going to continue his attack against the centre by playing c7, c5, and only then will develop his kingside with knight g8 to f6 and castles when White's pieces have been displaced. So put Black's knight back on b8 and we'll see an alternative to this knight d7 idea, b4, which was played in Dukstein, Ifkoff, Bamberg 1968. This is the position of diagram 4. White was embarrassed by this b4 move. He played his knight back to b1. He could have played it to e2, but we'll see the point of knight b1 immediately, because Black continued with knight to f6, and White rerouted his knight to d2 to protect the e-pawn. Black played 9, knight bd7. White cut out any further possibility of a knight g4 by Black by playing 10 h3. Black castled, White castled. And now Black put his plan into operation by playing 11 c5. White advanced with d5. Black played queen to c7. 13 knight to c4. a5 by Black. (14) queen to e1. Bishop a6 by Black. Knight fd2 was played. And now Black exploited White's somewhat shaky position in the centre by playing 15 e6, and Black was better. Black is better because if the e-file opens, White's queen is on a stupid square. Black's rooks are very actively placed, they can swing into the game. d5 is under pressure, and Black has possibilities to expand on the queenside further by playing a4, a3. All this points to a clear Black advantage, so if you did want an alternative to Zaldimakotov, which we'll continue with now, you can have it here. We'll go back. We're now examining the position in diagram 4, and White is playing 7 bishop d3, and instead of b4, Black is playing knight to d7. In Zaldimakotov, White tried to unsettle the Black position on the queen side by playing a2, a4. This is not a particularly good move, as it encourages Black to play something he wanted to do anyway. Can you see what he did? Black played b4. Along the lines of Dukstein-Ifkoff, White retreated his knight to b1. In general, he doesn't want to play knight e2, knight f6, knight g3. The knight on g3 doesn't serve much purpose, and c5 will come with greater effect. After knight b1, Kotov played the immediate c5. The thing to notice is that he's playing very actively to compensate for his lack of development on the king side, and he's setting White problems immediately so that he can't complete his development. White's faced with immediate problems on d4 and e4. He plays c3, bolstering up his centre. And only now does Black develop his knight. He plays knight gf6. He develops it at a time when he's pressurising e4. He gains a tempo by developing this move. Back at move 4, when he could have played knight f6, he didn't gain a tempo and white could develop normally. Here he can't do so. He's got to play knight bd2. Black's already gained some space on the queen side. He continued his attack on the centre by taking on c3. White played 12b takes c3 and black castled. And I want you to stop your tape recorders and examine how both sides have deployed their forces in this position. Well, you should have seen that by playing the moves in the order that he has, black is gaining tempi virtually every move. The white centre is so big now that black really can't miss it. Everything he does now forces white back, which is what white was trying to do by erecting this large pawn centre. So after castles by black on move 12, white played rook b1, attacking the bishop. Black defended this bishop with rook b8, and white castled. But now black really takes over the initiative. Knight to g4 on move 14. Knight c4 by white, and black played 15 d5, forcing white's next capture. 16 e takes d5, bishop takes d5. Again, stop and look at this position. You'll get more from examining games as a whole than you ever will from examining specific variations, which only last 10 to 12 moves or something, whatever. Opening theory is not just a question of the opening, it's about the whole game, schemes throughout the game. If you see that black has broken up the white centre completely, threatens to win a piece with bishop takes c4, that the white pieces are on ridiculous squares, and that black's pieces are operating very effectively, you'll understand a bit more about how black's strategy, or about why black's strategy has succeeded. We'll go over the rest of the game now, charitably without comment from white's point of view. He had to avoid losing a piece. He played 17 queen e2. Black captured on b1, rook takes b1. White played 18 rook takes b1. Black took the opportunity to take on e3. 18 knight takes e3. And white recaptured 19 knight takes e3, attacking the bishop on d5. This allowed black to win a pawn by playing bishop takes f3, 20 queen takes f3, c takes d4, 21 c takes d4, bishop takes d4 for black. And from now on it should be a matter of technique, although the opposite colour bishops do give white some slight drawing chances. White really had to get out of the annoying pin, so he played his king to h1 on move 22, and black protected his pawn on a6 by playing knight to c5. 23 bishop c4, queen a5, knight g4 by white, 24 bishop g7, 25 queen c6, rook to d8, 26 h3, e6. Now with e6, black shores up his position completely, cuts white's bishop out of the game, and now prepares the final attack. White decided to defend by playing rook to f1, to go passive and hope that Black couldn't make enough of his initiative to win the game. 27 queen b4 was played, and white snapped off the pawn on a6 with bishop takes a6. Whilst this did win the lost material back, it allowed black to develop a crushing initiative, and he played knight to e4, threatening knight g3 check. 29 rook f3, knight d2 was played. White played 30 queen c7, counter-attacking. Rook f8 was played. Rook d3 by white on move 31. Queen to b1 check. 32 king h2. Knight f1 check. 33 king g1. Knight g3 discovered check. 34 king f2. Knight e4 check. 35 king f3. Queen f1 check. 36 king takes e4. Queen e2 check. And white resigned in view of the impending f5 mate when he blocks on e3. Now, don't dwell too much on the last 10-15 moves or so of this game. What was important is the opening. Again, as with f5 on the previous side of this tape, one of the strongest points in its favour about 4a6 is there's no real theory on the move. White is thrown on his own resources immediately, and if you've ever experienced this yourself, you'll know just how difficult this is. Now let's have a look at the game in which black's strategy fails and white's attack succeeds. Back at diagram 3, black has played 4 a7 a6. We'll follow the game Zaitsev-Adamski from a Polish tournament in 1970, in which white played a far more direct system than Zaudemer adopted. He played 5 knight f3, black played b5, and instead of the useless bishop e3 of the previous example, Zaitsev played more incisively by playing immediately 6 bishop d3. Black continued in the style of Kotov by bishop b7, and white castled. Now this nuance in move order certainly gives white more attacking chances than he had in the previous example, indeed, in that he didn't work up any attack in that game. And the rest of this game sees him developing his attacking crushing style. You should look at this game as a good example of what to avoid as black in this variation. Again, if you continue in the style of Kotov as Adamski did, you get a terrible game. Black played 7 knight d7, and white advanced in the centre immediately by 8 e5. Black decided that he could afford to play 8 c5, but this was really the losing move. Let's see how white finished off, because he crushed black very quickly now. He played 9 knight g5. Black suddenly saw problems coming on the e6 and f7 squares. He played 9 knight h6, and white played 10 f5. Now it will take too long to analyse all of these moves. I suggest you look at this. What's in fact happening is that black's getting blitzed off the board. He took on d4, c takes d4. White captured on g6, f takes g6, sacrificing a piece, which black took, d takes c3. White played 12, g takes f7, check. Black found himself obliged to recapture in view of knight e6. 12 knight takes f7. 13 knight takes f7. Black checked on b6. 14 king h1. Queen c6 by black. Ha ha ha. 15 queen g4, defending against the mate. And now black castled, short. White played 16, bishop takes h7 check. King takes h7. 17 knight g5 check. King g8. 18 queen e6 check. Rook f7. Horrible move to play. He should have resigned. And after 19 queen takes f7 check, he did resign. Now that was really a nightmare game for black, and I don't recommend you play in that provocative way by playing knight d7 and c5 when white is advancing so rapidly and aggressively in the centre. We do have the chance to improve black's play. Let's go back to the position of diagram 5. In this position, black played the horrible move c5, which allowed white to crush home with f5. It was clear that this was far too slow. What black had to do was to stop, take stock, and consolidate against the white attack. And therefore, instead of c5, I suggest the move e7, e6. Now this prepares later on to go c5, stops threats of e5, e6 by white, and f4, f5. Black doesn't fear if white captures on d6 now by 9, e takes d6, c takes d6, 10, knight e4, which he simply answers by queen c7. He doesn't fear the sharp pawn sacrifice 9, d5, e takes d5, e takes d6, c takes d6, 11 f5, knight gf6, 12 rook e1 check, knight e5, knight takes e5 on move 13, d takes e5, rook takes e5 check, king f8, which if you examine the position, I believe leads to a game which is highly unclear, but in general okay for black because of his pressure against the white rook and possibilities of d4 later on, opening up the diagonal for his bishop. At any rate, there's definite fighting chances here for black. So after e6, this analysis leads us on to our third example, the game Skol against Keen from the Dutch-English match in Vlissingen 1970, in which Keen played our improvement 8 e6. So let's go back to diagram 5, and I suggest the move e6, and Skol played 9 a4. Again, you'll notice similarities with the last game, in which white tried to bust black's structure open on the queen side, and as before, black pushed on with b4. He'll normally always do this after a4 by white. He never wants to take it. But here, instead of the passive b1 square, white has a more aggressive square available on e4, and he played 10 e4. Now in the game, Keen continued with d6, d5, leading to a bad position. He should have seized his chance, really, because he could have played 10, bishop takes e4, eliminating the dangerous white knight, 11, bishop takes e4, d5, which leads to the position of diagram 6. With this exchange, he eliminates white's dangerous attacking piece, he prepares c7, c5, our thematic advance, and sets up a type of blockading position common to, I think, the French defence. White's forced to play 12 bishop d3 in this position, and black follows through his plan with 12 c5, intending to meet 13 d takes c5 with bishop g7 to f8. He will follow up with bishop takes c5 check, h5 and knight to e7. Play through this analysis and take it a step further and try and see how black fits in these moves in the subsequent play. Analyse it for yourself. Back to the game's goal keen then. The position of diagram 5, adding the moves 8e6, 9a4, 9b4, 10 knight e4, and the move Keen played d6, d5. I think Keen was a bit afraid of getting rid of his bishop on b7, but after d5, it's a bit of a cripple behind the pawn chain. He really should have lost after d5, because white continued knight eg5 on move 11. Keen played the horrible looking move knight to f8. White played 12 queen to e1. He was forced, Keen, to defend his pawn on b4 by 12a5. White played c3. Keen got rid of his knight on 8 by playing 13h6. The knight went back to h3 on move 14. B takes c3 was played. 15 queen takes c3. Knight e7. 16 b4 by white, opening up the game when black is very cramped, the correct strategy. A takes b4 was played. 17 queen takes b4. That black didn't lose this game is more of a triumph for Keen's ingenuity than anything else, because his position's atrocious at this stage. The game was drawn in 44 moves, incidentally. But I believe that with the improvement available back at move 10, bishop takes e4, followed by d5 and c5, black would have a very playable position. It's not possible to catalogue every single white attempt after 4a6, but you'll be getting the idea by now. Black's looking for activity, and he wants to seize every opportunity to attack that white centre. The moves b7, b5, knight d7 and c7, c5 are indispensable to his plan. Before we leave the move 4a6, a final timid attempt by white was seen in the game Upton against Martin from the Robert Silk Tournament 1984. We'll go back to diagram 3, in which 4a6, 5 knight f3 and 5 b5 should be added. Now you have to take into account when you see the next move that white was struggling in the tournament because he played 6a3. Now this is the sort of move that you play against an active system when you're a little bit afraid and you're a little bit lacking in confidence. It's not an idea I don't think you'll see in many of your games, but should you do so, I think that what I played tends to indicate that black has a very, very good game immediately. I played 16 bishop b7. White continued with the aggressive style, bishop d3, knight d7, castles, but now, because white had played a3 and substituted it instead of the very much better e5, I was able to play 8c5 following through our plan. White had nothing better than to advance with d5, and after knight gf6, threatening this castles and e6 idea that we saw in Dukstein-Ivkov, white felt compelled to lash out with 10 e5. After 10, knight takes d5, 11, knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, 12, bishop takes b5, black continued, 12, bishop b7, and with white's bishop forced to retreat, had excellent chances already. When you play this line, you'll be pretty much on your own, but if you study the preceding games, and in particular take note of black's playing the game in which he was crushed, you'll be able to orientate yourself in most unfamiliar positions and be able to decide what to do more exactly. Remember that white has committed himself much more than you have in putting his pawns forward so much. He's created weaknesses which hopefully you'll be able to exploit. At any rate, I think you'll have a head start on most white players if he hasn't listened to this tape. So I do ask you to try a7, a6. It's certainly interesting. We'll examine next the final attempt by white to form a massive pawn centre. This is known as the three pawns attack and begins with the move order 1 e4, g6, 2 d4, bishop g7, 3 c2, c3, intending to play after 3 d7, d6, 4 f4. In general, I don't believe that this is one of white's more dangerous tries, and black has enough time using conventional development to obtain an excellent game full of winning chances. There have been many outrageous tries by black in this position to try and refute the white setup, but by and large they've not succeeded, because the bolstering move c2, c3 makes the white position very solid. Let's look at what I consider to be a good method for black. Black should continue 3 d7, d6, 4 f2, f4, 4 knight to f6, reaching the position of diagram 7. In this position, as opposed to the Austrian attack, black develops the knight from g8 with tempo, hitting the white pawn on e4. White has two choices now, in my opinion, leading to a different type of game. At any rate, he's got to deal with the problem of his e-pawn. He can push it, he can defend it. The first line I want to consider is the immediate advance 5 e5. Now, the positions reached from the analysis resemble Alekhine's defence, in which black's knight entices the white centre forward in the hope that he can exploit it by pawn breaks later on. But I don't think that e5 is a very good move because it gives black a lot of opportunities too soon. By the simple move 5 d takes e5, forcing f takes e5, I think obviously d takes e5 and the queen swap is ridiculous with white king stuck in the centre and no development. So after 6f takes e5, black plays knight to d5. Now you'll note in this position that white's centre is securely protected at the moment, but black has quite nice development. He can chip away with f7, f6 or c5, and he has easy development for his pieces. We won't go too deeply into variations, but we will illustrate the further black strategy from this position by following the game Ljubojevic-Timon from Malaga 1971, in which you'll get a good idea of the ideas for both sides. White decided that he shouldn't leave his pieces on the back rank for the rest of the game and played 7 knight f3. Black castled, all very sensible moves, and white played bishop to c4. In general, if white played his bishop to e2 or to d3, black would prepare the move c5. But after bishop c4, Black played c5 immediately, and Ljubojevic took the pawn off. 9 d takes c5, reaching the position of diagram 8. What should Black do in this position? Take a look at it and see if you can find what he did. He played 9 bishop to e6. Now it's fundamental to your understanding of this position that Black doesn't try to regain his pawn immediately. He sees that White has weak pawns at e5 and c5 and prefers rapid, incisive developing moves, choosing only to regain his pawn when the time is ripe. I imagine that quite a lot of you were worried if you had played bishop e6 by knight g5. This may appear to be quite strong, but in fact it simply puts White further behind in development after Black playing knight to c6, ignoring the threat. The analysis points to a Black advantage. After 11 castles, knight takes e5, 12 knight takes e6, f takes e6, rook takes f8, check, bishop takes f8. And Black being so far ahead in development, and in view of the white pawn on c5, he's slightly better. Again, back in diagram 8, bishop takes d5 was played in Teschner-Keen, Berlin 1971, but we won't dwell on this other than to show you the dreadful continuation from White's point of view, of course. Black played 10, queen takes d5, 11 castles, queen takes c5 check, 12 queen d4, knight a6, 13 bishop e3, queen takes d4, 14 bishop takes d4, bishop d5, and simply White's e-pawn is very weak. We'll go back to diagram 8 now, in which Timon continued with bishop e6. Ljubojevic decided to hang grimly to his pawn and played 10 queen to d4. Timon played the natural knight to c6. White played 11 queen to e4. Knight a5 by Black. And after 12 bishop e2, Black began to utilise his advantages in development by ganging up on the white pawns. He played 12 queen c7. Again, stop and look at this position. Assess the chances. Is White's e-pawn dropping off? Did any of you consider b4 by White? Well, I think this only leads to a further loosening of the position after knight c6, after which the e-pawn simply drops. Therefore, after queen c7, Ljubojevic decided to stake everything on a kingside attack and played 13 queen h4. After having driven the bishop to an inferior square by playing knight a5, Timon re-centralised the knight by knight c6. Ljubojevic played 14 bishop h6. Timon took the pawn on e5, Knight takes e5. 15 bishop takes g7, king takes g7 was played. Ljubojevic pinned the knight on e5, queen d4. f6 was played. White eventually castled. And Black played rook a d8. Now Black still has a slight advantage in this position. It shouldn't be too much if White plays circumspectly, but you have to realise that if Black has a slight advantage, then this is okay for him. You should be happy with a slight advantage with Black after, say, 18 moves. Ljubojevic finished his development with 18 knight to a3, and Timon played knight g4. Notice how the e3 square is is weak. Knight b5 was played on move 19, queen b8, queen a4 by Lubojevic on move 20, knight f4, '21 rook a1, and now Timon produced the tremendous shot 21 rook d2. Now if you don't understand fully this move, I suggest you stop your tape recorders and just have a look at it. White couldn't take that rook, of course. 22 knight takes d2, knight h3 check, forces mate on h2. So he was forced to find the horrible move g3, and after knight takes e2 check, he simply lost a piece. Now the reason black was able to create such a devastating counterattack was that white simply fell behind in development. He spent too much time pushing his pawns in the opening. Black wasn't that much better during most of that game, and it took some fairly careless play by white. I mean, this knight b5 and queen a4 was a bit airy-fairy. But it does indicate that black would seem to have a comfortable game after e5. Once your knight's on d5, you can look forward to preparing c5. Don't forget that white's centre, without the protection of its pieces, is weak, and if you can dissolve away these pawns, the side who's better developed generally has the advantage. So supplement this analysis by further reading on the modern. I'll give you the books which I consider to be good on this opening at the end of the tape, and rest assured that if your opponent plays e5, you'll have a comfortable position. We'll go back to diagram 7 now and examine white's second continuation, a protection of the centre with 5 bishop to d3. In view of my remarks on 5e5, you will expect that this is the more dangerous continuation for black. Black has to be more careful. He can't do very many aggressive things in this position, although he's tried some things. He's tried to gambit pawns by playing c5, 5c5, white captured on c5 and black castled. He's tried to develop his pieces in the hedgehog style by playing c6, a6, b6. But all these have not produced good results. The line I'm going to suggest is an attempt to utilise our slight development advantage by opening up the position immediately. We can't allow white to consolidate this solid centre. His command of space can often result decisively later on in the game, and black can be permanently cramped. Black must become active immediately with the move 5e5. What should white do in this position? If he takes the pawn on e5 with the f pawn, which looks fairly natural, black captures back with the d pawn. And now you'll see that white's centre is under some pressure. Obviously d takes e5, knight g4 is really very good for black. So what can white do? If he goes forward with d5, black can attack the centre further with c7, c6, although he might decide to castle first in this position. Nevertheless, we can say that our strategy has succeeded because we've opened up the game before white could develop his pieces. Therefore, our advantage in development is going to begin to tell. So after e5, white will have to be more careful. We'll follow the game Robert Byrne against Donna from San Juan, 1969, in which white left the centre alone and played 6 knight to f3. Now black has a wide choice, but I think the best move is e takes f4. Now this may appear illogical to you because it develops a white piece. But above all, what we're trying to prove is that the white centre is a bit shaky. So after 7 bishop takes f4, black castles, incidentally threatening knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, rook e8, winning back the piece. So therefore white castled, which is natural. And now black played the key move of the entire system, c7, c5. Please stop your tape recorders and look at this position. What is black trying to achieve? You will have seen when black played e5, in the variation in which white captured immediately, that the d4 point came under pressure. The move c7, c5 is a similar attempt to put this point under pressure. If white captures on c5 now, black recaptures with his d-pawn, and then the problems of his backward d-pawn would have been solved, and white has a pawn on e4 which looks a bit weak. If white advances in the centre after c5, e.g. he plays 9 d5, black has a useful pawn advance on the queen side to hand. For instance, he may decide to play b5 immediately. He has rook e8, queen e7, knight bd7, knight g4 and knight to e5 as a possibility. He can play bishop g4 to reduce white's control of the e5 square, although that's very sharp with the f file open. He can play a6 or knight a6 to c7. He has a wide choice of plans. Therefore Byrne decided not to block the centre nor to take, but to play knight bd2. And now black continued this very logical plan by c takes d4, c takes d4. And Donald continued with knight c6. This is the position of diagram 9. We'll go on to discuss it on side